Hi everybody, this is a review of White Light by Vanessa Garcia. This review is full of spoilers, so if you have not read this book, I recommend going and checking out the spoiler-free version of this review. This book has so much depth and layers that you may have to bear with me a little bit. This may go a little long, maybe a little rambly, but frankly, this is the best book that I think I've ever read. It certainly is the book that has affected me the most. And in 10 years, when someone asks me, what book changed you as an artist? What book really just got under your skin and wouldn't let you go? For me, most likely, it will be White Light by Vanessa Garcia. This book was published in 2015. It was published by a smaller press, and I assume that's why it wasn't part of the Man Booker, because frankly, it is so good that it's shocking to me that it wasn't. That's the only thing I can think of, is maybe it didn't qualify. As much as I love The Sellout, I actually enjoyed this book significantly more. This book has a lot of artistic merit. It can be read on a surface level just to read the story, and you will get a lot out of this book. But if you are a deeper reader, you will find a lot more in this book. If you are a writer, you will be blown away. And if you're an artist, you're going to recognize yourself in this book. So this book is about Veronica Gonzalez. She is a Cuban American in Miami. She is a modern installation artist who is at a crossroads in her career. And she is finally given a big break. And moments after her big break, her father dies. And that portion of the novel is so honestly written that it was extremely uncomfortable. And I've never seen obesity written in the way that it is in this novel. So one of the things that I found fascinating about this novel, just immediately on the surface, is the structure of the book. This book is broken up into 3 parts. So if you're reading it on Kindle, you're not going to see chapters in this book. 3 parts. The first part of this book The first part of this book is written as one big long chapter. I think, if I remember right, it's about 50 pages long. And that portion of the book, she starts off on an airplane, and it brings up her feelings about 9/11 and her own sense of losing her open-mindedness and her struggle as she goes and meets with her essentially art agent, I guess you would call her. She meets with Lee, and Lee tells her that there's an opportunity for her to possibly have a solo show during a huge art festival, Basel. And if she gets a solo show, pretty much her career is made. And she's been struggling up to this point. She's only really had group shows. She hasn't really sold much. Her boyfriend is not the same kind of artist she is. He's a commercial artist. He doesn't really understand modern art at all, and kind of thinks it's a little silly. And so she's at this crossroads where she's going to have to choose whether or not to continue her art or whether to find a new career. And that portion of the book has a very slow and relentless pace. It does not let you go. And the writing is exquisite. The sentence structure in the first part of the book, I think, is much more poetic than in the second part of the book, which really lends itself to the feel of that first part of the book. Just her searching nature, you see that in the writing. And I will tell you that this writer got me on the first page. So let me just read the opening line. Sometimes you wake up with a hole in your heart and you're not sure why. It's a circle carved by something you can't touch, something that opens up in your sleep and wakes you up hungry. As I was reading this first part of the book, I was reading it on paper, and I immediately felt frustrated because there were so many amazing lines, amazing quotes that I was having to set the book down, every page or two in order to handwrite notes. I ended up picking up the Kindle version by the second part of the book. The second part of the book is structured very differently. The second part of the book is significantly longer, and instead of being structured in chapters, that part of the book is structured as numbered scenes, which lends it this feeling of just this relentless charging, almost like a train, like the train wreck is coming, and the sentences are shorter, and even though the language is more simple, the structure of the sentences is very unique. And in that second part of the book, you find out that her father is extremely obese and the problems that that causes as he goes to the hospital, which was written in a way that was this glaring light on this issue. As he is taken into the ambulance, the people in the ambulance just assume that, he must always be like this. And it's even said, is he always like this? And Veronica's like, no, he's not. Obviously, there's something wrong with him. And they're not taking him seriously. And they get him into the hospital. And this is the point where culture really shows beautifully, because at no point in this novel does it feel like she's trying to make a Cuban novel or an immigrant novel, but it intrinsically is. And so one of the things that was brought up on Literary Roadhouse when we reviewed this book or discussed this book was one of my co-hosts said that this is the most Cuban novel she's ever read, that there were little things that are cultural things that if you're outside the community, you won't notice, but if you're inside the community, you will, such as carrying just random shit in Victoria's Secret bags, or being at the hospital and then suddenly everybody shows up, and not just family, but all the ex-girlfriends and all the current girlfriends and the aunts and the uncles and everybody in the ER all at the same time. And then they start trading stories as they're waiting for him to be helped. And the part of this book the part of that section that was most painful for me was as her father is laying on the bed, the descriptions that are used for him are very visceral and very grotesque in a way. He's described as body parts rather than as the whole. And the hospital isn't treating him well. And he needs a CAT scan, but he can't get one because there is no CAT scan big enough for him. And at one point, the mother suggests calling the zoo. And when they call the zoo says, we have a machine, but we can't use it for humans. We get this call all the time. Please tell the hospital that we can't use the machine for humans, it's for animals. And at that point, my heart completely broke. It gutted me. Just frankly, that whole second part of the novel just completely gutted me emotionally. The third part of the novel, you see where, she has 3 months to get the show together. She only has an idea of what the show will be, and she is going through this process of creating art at the same time that her relationship is breaking up, and she's dealing with the grief of her father dying, and she's also, reconnecting with a really old friendship as he's creating art for his first time. And that portion of the book, again, is interestingly constructed. And so instead of numbered scenes that feel like this plodding, constant train that's going to run you down, those scenes are described as colors. And at first, each color is different. And there's a little part at the top that describes what that color means to an artist or the history of that color. And then you see that theme throughout that scene. And then as it goes on, the colors start to repeat, and she's working through things. And there's a lot of symbolism in these colors. There's a lot of symbolism throughout the entire novel. For example, there is the symbol of the empty chair, which you see reflected in a photograph that she gets in the first part of the book. It's reflected in her friend's artwork, which you see towards the end of the second part of the book as he does an installation piece at the Twin Towers location where his brother died. He's reading at that location. He's got this empty chair to represent his brother. And then you see it at the end of the book where the chair is now part of the artwork, but also the chair is reflected in that missing part of the relationship that she's ended. This book is really hard to talk about because there's just so much there. And I think it lends itself really well to literary analysis, which I am not qualified to do. As I read this book, I had so many emotions as I was reading this book. And when I finished, I immediately had to go back and read it again. This is a book I will be rereading multiple times in order to understand it all. This is a book that changes how I approach writing for sure. the novel way that it's constructed works really well, and it opened my eyes to different ways of organizing a novel. I've seen similar things done in short stories. I haven't really read anything that was done that way. It also brought to mind how the different organization actually changes the pacing of the three separate parts of the book, which I thought was fascinating. The language is very poetic, even flowery in parts, but it's also simple in other parts. And so I thought that was interesting. A lot of writers, if they start off with a lot of flowery prose, the whole thing's going to be flowery prose. But this artist really uses the language that's appropriate to where she is in her healing process, and the tone and the pacing of the book. I especially appreciated the second part of the book because the tone, both by the change in structure and the change in language, gave me such tension and just foreboding as I was reading that second part that I don't think she could have portrayed if she had used the language of the first section or even the language of the last section. The last section feels very searching, it feels very confusing and healing and troubling, and it captures grief beautifully. It also captures that sense of losing a relationship when the thing that you need most at that point in time is to not be alone. I will also say that this is the first time that I've seen or heard anyone speak about modern installation art in a way that made sense to me. I love art. I love, paintings. I love beautiful sculptures. But a lot of modern installation art, it can feel confusing and you're like, I don't get it. And as you're watching her create this piece, you start to get it. The other thing that was really interesting is you see her referring to other artists as she's making her pieces, and you hear the process in the artist's brain of being inspired by different things that have nothing to do with the finished project. And that's something I've never seen in a book. It's something I've never heard anybody talk about really well. I think the reason why I finally got it in this book is because Vanessa Garcia, in addition to being a writer, she is also a playwright and a modern installation artist. She's a painter. So she works in multiple modalities. And I think because she does so many different types of art to such a high level, she's able to look at her process in a way that somebody that is just a painter wouldn't be able to see of their own selves, or someone that only writes wouldn't necessarily be able to see of their own selves. She can see the connections between how a writer creates art and how a painter creates art and how a sculptress creates art and how a poet creates art. And she's able to make those links in a way that's really interesting. So who would I recommend this book for? I recommend it for everybody. Like, frankly, I'm in love with this book. And I kind of hate the author because she is so talented at everything she does that it should be illegal. In addition, she's freaking beautiful. I'm like, that's just not fair. Like, how can you be beautiful and an amazing painter and an amazing author and have your plays, in theaters all over the world? Like, that's just not fair. This woman has more talent than should be legal, and I want to know which crossroads she stood at in order to get all that talent. So, because she is so talented, I think anyone that loves literary fiction is going to get a lot out of this book. I think if you primarily read genre fiction and dense literary fiction kind of frustrates you, I think you may actually still love this book because it is so beautiful and the emotions are so real that it kind of, it makes it really relatable and accessible in a lot of ways. I think people that are used to looking at layers and get frustrated at novels will really get a lot out of this because there's just so much here to find. And then lastly, anyone that creates any kind of art, there are certain books that when you read them, you're like, that changed me as an artist. And I think that this book has that propensity. Especially as a writer, we hear a lot, right, from all the different senses. And because she does visual art, she does that in a way that it kind of shows you what can be done with words. It can be more than, she saw red and she smelt roses. It can be done in a way where the senses intermingle and mix, where synesthesia becomes part of the experience. And so I have a hard time saying anyone shouldn't read this novel because it's just so amazing. I'm sure not everyone's going to love this book, but I think it's a book that everybody should read if you're a reader, just because it makes you think. And if you don't like it, I think it will make you think about why you don't like it. And frankly, the issues with the father in the hospital are so socially important and something that I've never seen written, that I just think it's important. This book, oh my goodness, this book, yeah, that's my review. Ciao.